What if the Anunnaki were real and actual beings who walked among our ancestors? Were they ancient aliens or alien gods? I'm about to take you on a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew about human origins. We're going to explore evidence that mainstream archaeology has struggled to explain, examine translations of ancient texts that paint a picture so vivid it's almost impossible to dismiss, and investigate whether the Anunnaki were simply products of human imagination or something much more profound. So sit back and relax as we dive deep into this unsolved ancient mystery, and look at why a civilization that emerged from seemingly nowhere possessed knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering that rivals our modern understanding. But before we do, you will have incredible luck if you like, and subscribe before this video ends. Now let's dive in. The story begins in ancient Mesopotamia, in what is now modern-day Iraq, where the world's first urban civilization suddenly appeared around 3800 BCE. The Sumerians didn't gradually develop their incredible technologies and knowledge. They seemed to possess them from the very beginning. They had complex writing systems, advanced mathematics, sophisticated irrigation networks, and architectural achievements that modern engineers still marvel at today. But here's where it gets interesting. The Sumerians themselves never claimed to have developed these innovations on their own. Instead, they consistently attributed their knowledge to beings they called the Anunnaki. Translated literally, Anunnaki means those who came down from the heavens. These weren't abstract spiritual concepts or metaphorical deities. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki as physical beings with human-like characteristics who lived among them, taught them, and directly influenced their civilization. Think about that for a moment. The world's first literate civilization, the people who gave us the wheel, the sailboat, the plough, and the first written laws, all claimed their knowledge came from beings who descended from the sky. These weren't primitive people making up stories around campfires. These were sophisticated urban dwellers who kept meticulous records of everything from business transactions to astronomical observations. The cuneiform tablets tell us that the Anunnaki were led by a pantheon of powerful figures. There was Anu, described as the supreme ruler who remained in the heavens. His son Enlil, portrayed as the lord of the air and storms, who directly governed earthly affairs. And Enki, the god of wisdom and water, who was said to have created humanity itself. These weren't vague spiritual concepts. The tablets describe their personalities, their conflicts, their decisions, and their direct interventions in human affairs. Now, mainstream archaeology explains this as mythology, as primitive humans creating stories to explain natural phenomena they couldn't understand. But here's the problem with that explanation. The Sumerian accounts are incredibly detailed, consistent, and specific. They describe technologies, processes, and knowledge that these ancient people shouldn't have possessed according to conventional timelines of human development. For example, the Sumerians had detailed knowledge of our solar system, including planets that weren't officially discovered until the modern era. They described Uranus and Neptune with accuracy that shouldn't have been possible without telescopes. They knew that the Earth was round and understood concepts of orbital mechanics that weren't supposed to be discovered until thousands of years later. But the mystery goes deeper than just advanced astronomical knowledge. The Sumerians appeared to have an understanding of genetics that rivals modern science. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes the hero as being 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. The creation myths speak of humanity being fashioned from clay mixed with divine essence. These aren't just poetic metaphors. When you examine the original translations, they read more like scientific procedures than religious allegories. The Anunnaki texts describe processes that sound remarkably similar to genetic engineering. They talk about combining essences, creating hybrid beings, and improving human capabilities through divine intervention. Enki, the god of wisdom, is specifically credited with creating modern humans by combining earthly and heavenly elements. The texts describe multiple attempts, failures, and refinements in this creation process, reading more like a laboratory journal than a creation myth. What makes this even more intriguing is that these accounts appear in cultures around the world, completely independent of Sumerian influence. The Hindu Vedas speak of the Devas, beings from the sky who possessed advanced technology. Greek mythology tells of the Titans and Olympians, divine beings who lived among humans and influenced their development. Egyptian texts describe the Neteru, godlike beings who ruled during a golden age. Native American traditions speak of star people who came from the sky and taught humanity essential skills. Are we supposed to believe that every ancient civilization independently invented nearly identical stories about beings from the sky who possessed advanced technology and created or influenced human development? The similarities are too specific, too detailed, and too widespread to be mere coincidence. Let's examine what the Sumerian tablets actually say about the Anunnaki's arrival on Earth. According to these ancient records, the Anunnaki came to Earth approximately 450,000 years ago. Their home planet, called Nibiru, had an extremely long elliptical orbit that brought it close to Earth every 3,600 years. The Anunnaki came not as conquerors or explorers, but as miners. They needed gold to repair their planet's deteriorating atmosphere. Initially, the Anunnaki themselves performed the mining operations, but according to the tablets, the work was grueling and dangerous. Eventually, the worker Anunnaki rebelled against their leadership, demanding relief from the brutal conditions. This crisis led to a solution proposed by Enki: create a primitive worker species that could perform the mining operations. The tablets describe in remarkable detail how Enki and the birth goddess Ninhursag worked together to create this worker species. They took the essence of an existing hominid species and combined it with Anunnaki genetic material. The process wasn't simple or immediate. The text described multiple attempts, various failures, and gradual refinements before they succeeded in creating viable beings. These newly created beings were humanity's ancestors. According to the Sumerian accounts, early humans were created specifically to serve the Anunnaki, to work in their mines, and to provide the labor that the Anunnaki themselves no longer wanted to perform. This wasn't a spiritual creation from nothing. This was described as a deliberate genetic engineering project using existing biological material. But here's where the story becomes even more complex. The tablets tell us that, over time, some of the Anunnaki began to interbreed with their human creations. This wasn't supposed to happen according to their original plan, but it did. The result was a hybrid population that possessed both human and Anunnaki characteristics. These hybrids became the heroes, kings, and leaders of early human civilizations. The Bible actually references this same event in Genesis chapter 6, where it mentions that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and took them as wives. Their offspring were described as the Nephilim, mighty men of renown. This wasn't a separate story. This was the same event described in Sumerian texts, just filtered through Hebrew culture thousands of years later. The implications of this are staggering. If the Anunnaki accounts are accurate, then human development wasn't a gradual evolutionary process. It was the result of direct intervention by an advanced species. This would explain the sudden appearance of Sumerian civilization, the rapid development of human technology, and the mysterious gaps in the archaeological record that mainstream science struggles to address. But let's be clear about what we're examining here. We're not talking about little grey aliens in flying saucers. The Anunnaki were described as being very similar to humans in appearance, just larger and longer lived. They had human emotions, human conflicts, and human-like social structures. They weren't perfect beings or spiritual entities. They were physical beings with their own agendas, their own problems, and their own limitations. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki as being approximately 8 to 12 feet tall, with lifespans that stretched for hundreds of thousands of years. They had advanced technology, but it wasn't magic. They used tools, vehicles, and equipment that the Sumerians described as best they could with their available vocabulary. What we might call aircraft, they described as flying boats or divine chariots. What we might call genetic engineering, they described as fashioning humans from clay and divine breath. Think about it this way. If you were transported back to ancient Sumeria with modern technology, how would those people describe your smartphone, your car, or your medical equipment? They would use the only words and concepts they had available. They might describe your phone as a magical talking stone, or your car as a self-moving chariot. This is exactly what we see in the Sumerian descriptions of Anunnaki technology. The archaeological evidence supporting these accounts is more extensive than most people realize. We find megalithic structures around the world that required engineering capabilities beyond what mainstream archaeology attributes to ancient peoples. We find evidence of advanced metallurgy, precision stone cutting, and massive construction projects that seem to require knowledge and technology that supposedly didn't exist. Consider the precision of the Egyptian pyramids, the massive stones of Pumapunku in Bolivia, or the intricate underground cities of Turkey. These aren't just impressive achievements, they represent levels of planning, engineering, and execution that challenge our understanding of ancient capabilities. When you examine these sites through the lens of Anunnaki influence, many of the mysteries begin to make sense. But the evidence goes beyond just architectural achievements. We find consistent accounts in ancient texts of beings who possessed knowledge that was far in advance of their time. We find descriptions of flying vehicles, advanced weapons, and technologies that sound remarkably similar to modern innovations. We find genetic anomalies in human development that suggest artificial intervention rather than natural evolution. The question isn't whether ancient peoples had vivid imaginations. The question is whether their accounts of advanced beings might be based on actual encounters rather than pure fantasy. When you examine the consistency, the detail, and the global nature of these accounts, pure mythology becomes an increasingly inadequate explanation. Now, let's dive deeper into what makes the Anunnaki accounts so compelling from a scientific perspective. When you examine the Sumerian texts through the lens of modern knowledge, patterns emerge that are impossible to ignore. These aren't just stories about gods and miracles. They're detailed accounts of processes, procedures, and technologies that align remarkably well with what we now understand about genetics, astronomy, and engineering. Take the creation accounts, for instance. The Sumerian tablets don't describe humanity being created from nothing through divine magic. Instead, they describe a methodical process that sounds remarkably similar to genetic engineering. Enki is said to have taken the essence of an existing creature and combined it with Anunnaki genetic material. The tablets describe multiple attempts, various failures, and gradual improvements in the process. This isn't how ancient peoples typically described divine creation. Usually, gods in mythology create through will alone, through speaking things into existence, or through simple transformation. But the Anunnaki accounts read more like laboratory reports. They describe specific procedures, mention the involvement of multiple specialists, and detail the trial and error nature of the work. Even more intriguingly, the texts describe what can only be understood as artificial gestation. The newly created beings weren't born naturally. They were developed in what the tablets call clay vessels under the supervision of birth goddesses. 14 goddesses are specifically mentioned as being involved in this process, each responsible for developing the created beings to maturity. When you translate the ancient terminology into modern concepts, you're looking at descriptions of artificial wombs, genetic manipulation, and controlled breeding programs. These aren't concepts that primitive agricultural societies should have been able to imagine, let alone describe in such detailed, consistent terms across multiple texts. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Sumerian accounts don't just describe the creation of humanity. They describe the ongoing relationship between the Anunnaki and their creations. According to these texts, the Anunnaki didn't create humans and then disappear. They remained actively involved in human development for thousands of years. The tablets describe the Anunnaki establishing cities, teaching humans agriculture, introducing writing systems, and providing the knowledge that allowed civilization to flourish. But this wasn't portrayed as benevolent guidance. The texts make it clear that humans were created for a specific purpose: to serve the Anunnaki's needs. The mining operations continued under human labor. The tablets describe vast underground facilities where humans extracted gold and other minerals for their Anunnaki masters. Archaeological evidence supports this. We find extensive ancient mining operations in South Africa dating back hundreds of thousands of years, far predating any known human civilization. These mines show evidence of sophisticated extraction techniques and massive-scale operations that don't fit conventional timelines of human development. The Anunnaki weren't just mythological figures in these accounts. They were administrators, scientists, and rulers who governed human society according to their own needs and interests. The tablets describe their internal politics, their conflicts with each other, and their debates over how to manage the human population. One of the most significant events described in these texts is what became known as the Great Flood. But in the Sumerian accounts, this wasn't a divine punishment for human wickedness. It was the result of a deliberate decision by some Anunnaki leaders to reduce the human population, which had grown beyond their ability to control. The tablets describe heated debates among the Anunnaki leadership. Some wanted to allow the flood to destroy all of humanity. Others, particularly Enki, argued for preserving at least some humans. The compromise was to secretly warn selected humans about the coming disaster, allowing them to survive and rebuild. This account predates the biblical flood story by thousands of years, but it's far more detailed and specific. The Sumerian version names the human who was warned, describes the construction of the survival vessel, and explains the political dynamics among the Anunnaki that led to the decision. What makes this particularly compelling is that we have geological evidence for massive flooding events that correspond to the time frames described in these texts. We find evidence of sudden sea level rises, massive displacement of populations, and catastrophic environmental changes that align with the Sumerian accounts. But the Anunnaki influence didn't end with the flood. The tablets describe how they worked to rebuild human civilization afterward. They re-established cities, reintroduced technologies, and selected new leaders to govern human populations. This is where we see the origin of the concept of divine kingship that appears in cultures worldwide. According to the Sumerian accounts, the Anunnaki established a system where human rulers were chosen and legitimized by divine authority. These kings weren't just political leaders, they were intermediaries between the Anunnaki and the human population. They were responsible for ensuring that human society continued to serve Anunnaki interests while maintaining order and productivity. This system spread throughout the ancient world. We see it in Egypt, where pharaohs were considered divine or semi-divine beings. We see it in Mesopotamia, where kings ruled by divine mandate. We see it in the Americas, where rulers claimed descent from sky gods. The consistency of this pattern across isolated cultures suggests a common origin. The tablets also describe the gradual withdrawal of direct Anunnaki involvement in human affairs. As human populations grew and became more sophisticated, the Anunnaki began to reduce their visible presence. They moved from direct rule to indirect influence, from physical presence to working through human intermediaries. But according to these accounts, they never completely left. The text suggests that the Anunnaki maintained oversight of human development, intervening when necessary to guide or correct human progress. They established mystery schools, secret societies, and religious institutions that preserved their knowledge and maintained their influence across generations. This would explain why we find similar advanced knowledge appearing in different cultures at different times. It wasn't independent discovery. It was the controlled release of Anunnaki knowledge through established channels. The timing and distribution of technological advances begins to make sense when viewed through this lens. The implications of this are profound. If the Anunnaki accounts are accurate, then human history isn't the story of gradual evolution and independent development. It's the story of a managed species, guided and controlled by beings with their own agenda. Our religions, our governments, our technologies, even our genetic makeup might all be the result of Anunnaki intervention. But let's examine the evidence more critically. What would we expect to find if the Anunnaki accounts were true? We would expect to find sudden leaps in human development rather than gradual progress. We would expect to find technologies and knowledge that appear before they should, according to conventional timelines. We would expect to find similar stories and beliefs across isolated cultures. We would expect to find evidence of advanced ancient civilizations that mainstream archaeology struggles to explain. And remarkably, this is exactly what we find. Human development isn't a smooth curve of gradual improvement. It's marked by sudden leaps, mysterious gaps and achievements that seem to appear out of nowhere. The Sumerian civilization is just one example. We see similar patterns in Egypt, in the Indus Valley, in pre-Columbian America, and in ancient China. These civilizations didn't gradually develop their sophisticated knowledge. They seemed to possess it from their earliest periods. They had advanced mathematics, sophisticated astronomy, complex engineering, and detailed knowledge of metallurgy and agriculture that appeared suddenly and fully formed. The conventional explanation is that these developments were the result of human genius and gradual accumulation of knowledge. But this explanation becomes increasingly strained when you examine the specific details. How did the Sumerians know about planets that weren't visible to the naked eye? How did ancient peoples achieve precision in stone cutting that rivals modern techniques? How did they move massive stones over great distances without advanced machinery? The Anunnaki explanation provides answers to these questions. If humans were guided by beings with advanced technology and knowledge, then these achievements become understandable. The sudden appearance of sophisticated civilizations, the consistent accounts of sky gods across cultures, and the evidence of advanced ancient technologies all fit within this framework. But this raises another question. If the Anunnaki were real, where are they now? The Sumerian texts actually address this. They describe the Anunnaki gradually reducing their direct involvement in human affairs as humanity became more capable of managing itself. They didn't disappear entirely, but they withdrew from visible leadership roles. The tablets suggest that the Anunnaki established systems and institutions that could maintain their influence without requiring their constant presence. They created religious hierarchies, political structures, and knowledge systems that would preserve their guidance across generations. They selected human bloodlines that carried their genetic heritage and positioned these lineages as rulers and leaders. This would explain why we find consistent themes of divine kingship, secret knowledge, and ruling elites throughout human history. It's not that humans naturally tend toward these systems. It's that these systems were established by the Anunnaki and maintained by their human descendants and representatives. The question of whether the Anunnaki are still present in some form remains open. Some researchers suggest that they continue to influence human development through hidden channels. Others propose that they departed entirely, leaving humanity to develop independently. Still others suggest that they remain present, but in forms that we don't recognize or understand. What's clear is that the Anunnaki accounts provide a framework for understanding human history that addresses many of the mysteries and anomalies that conventional explanations struggle with. Whether you accept these accounts as literal truth or as valuable symbolic narratives, they offer insights into human development that are worth serious consideration. The evidence continues to accumulate. New archaeological discoveries, advances in genetic research, and improved translations of ancient texts all contribute to our understanding of these questions. The picture that emerges is complex, challenging, and potentially revolutionary in its implications for how we understand human origins and development. As we continue to explore these questions, we must remain open to possibilities that challenge our conventional understanding while maintaining rigorous standards of evidence and analysis. The Anunnaki question isn't just about ancient history, it's about understanding who we are, where we came from, and what our future might hold. The question of physical evidence becomes crucial when examining the Anunnaki accounts. If these beings were real, if they lived among humans for thousands of years, if they built cities and conducted mining operations, then surely there should be traces of their presence that we can identify and study today. And remarkably, when you know what to look for, these traces begin to emerge from archaeological sites around the world. Let's start with the most obvious question: where would the Anunnaki have lived? According to the Sumerian texts, they established major centers of operation in Mesopotamia, but they weren't confined to that region. The tablets describe a global network of facilities, including mining operations in Africa, processing centers in the Americas, and administrative compounds throughout the Middle East. The site of Baalbek in Lebanon provides one of the most compelling examples. Here we find a massive stone platform, built from blocks weighing over 800 tons each. These aren't rough-hewn stones, they're precisely cut and fitted together with tolerances that would be challenging to achieve with modern equipment. The platform predates Roman construction by thousands of years, yet it demonstrates engineering capabilities that seem impossible for the time period. Mainstream archaeology struggles to explain Baalbek. The conventional explanation is that it was built by unknown ancient peoples using techniques that have been lost to history. But when you examine the site through the lens of Anunnaki accounts, it makes perfect sense. The tablets describe landing platforms for their sky vehicles, and Baalbek fits this description exactly. The precision, the scale, and the location all align with what we would expect from an advanced civilization's aerospace facility. But Baalbek isn't unique. We find similar megalithic structures around the world that share common characteristics. Massive stone blocks, precision cutting, and engineering that exceeds what we attribute to ancient peoples. Pumapunku in Bolivia, Sacsayhuaman in Peru, the Giza complex in Egypt, and dozens of other sites all demonstrate similar capabilities. What's particularly intriguing is that these sites often show evidence of advanced metallurgy and tool use. At Pumapunku, we find stone blocks with perfectly straight cuts and precise angles that could only be achieved with diamond-tipped tools or laser cutting. The surfaces are so smooth and the angles so precise that they rival modern machine work. The conventional explanation is that ancient peoples achieved these results through patience, skill, and techniques that have been lost, but this explanation becomes increasingly implausible when you examine the evidence in detail. The volume of material processed, the precision achieved, and the consistency across multiple sites suggests capabilities far beyond what we attribute to ancient civilizations. The Anunnaki accounts provide a more satisfactory explanation. If these sites were built by beings with advanced technology, then the precision and scale become understandable. The stone cutting, the massive construction projects, and the engineering sophistication all fit within a framework of technologically advanced civilization. But physical evidence goes beyond just megalithic construction. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki as conducting extensive mining operations, particularly in Africa. According to these accounts, they extracted gold and other minerals on an industrial scale for hundreds of thousands of years. If this is true, then we should find evidence of ancient mining that predates known human civilizations. And remarkably, we do. In South Africa, we find extensive evidence of gold mining dating back hundreds of thousands of years. These aren't simple surface operations. They're deep shaft mines with sophisticated extraction techniques and processing facilities. The scale of these operations is enormous, involving thousands of workers and complex logistics. Archaeological dating places. These mining operations far earlier than any known human civilization should have been capable of such work. The techniques used, the scale of the operations, and the duration of the mining activity all suggest a level of organization and capability that doesn't fit conventional timelines of human development. Local traditions among the Zulu people describe these ancient mines as the work of the first people who came from the sky. These aren't recent stories influenced by modern UFO culture. These are ancient traditions that have been passed down for generations, describing beings who enslaved humans to work in gold mines deep underground. The correlation between the Sumerian accounts, the archaeological evidence, and the local traditions is striking. All three sources describe the same basic scenario: advanced beings conducting large-scale mining operations using human labor. The consistency across these different types of evidence suggests that we're dealing with historical events rather than mythology. But let's examine the genetic evidence. If the Anunnaki accounts are accurate, if they created modern humans through genetic manipulation, then we should find evidence of this intervention in human DNA. We should find genetic markers that don't fit normal evolutionary patterns, evidence of sudden changes in human development, and possibly even traces of non-human genetic material. Recent advances in genetic research have revealed some puzzling anomalies in human development. The human genome contains what scientists call junk DNA, genetic material that doesn't seem to serve any current function. Some researchers suggest that this junk DNA might be the remnants of genetic modifications made by an advanced civilization. More intriguingly, genetic analysis has revealed that modern humans experienced a sudden population bottleneck approximately 70,000 years ago. This bottleneck reduced the human population to perhaps as few as 10,000 individuals. The cause of this bottleneck is unknown, but it corresponds roughly to the time frame described in Sumerian accounts of the Great Flood. The genetic evidence also shows that modern humans developed their current characteristics relatively recently in evolutionary terms. The transition from archaic humans to modern humans appears to have been rapid rather than gradual, suggesting external intervention rather than natural evolution. Additionally, humans possess several characteristics that are unusual among mammals. Our extended childhood, our complex language capabilities, our advanced cognitive abilities, and our capacity for abstract thinking all represent significant departures from normal mammalian development patterns. These characteristics appear suddenly in the archaeological record without clear evolutionary precursors. The Anunnaki accounts provide an explanation for these anomalies. If humans were created through genetic manipulation by an advanced species, then these unusual characteristics make sense. They represent the intended modifications designed to create a species capable of complex tasks while remaining controllable and manageable. But the evidence extends beyond just genetics and archaeology. The Sumerian texts describe advanced knowledge that ancient peoples shouldn't have possessed. They describe astronomical phenomena that weren't supposed to be discovered until the modern era. They describe mathematical concepts that predate their supposed invention by thousands of years. They describe engineering principles that align with modern understanding. For example, the Sumerians knew that the Earth was round and understood its place in the solar system. They had detailed knowledge of planetary orbits and could predict astronomical events with remarkable accuracy. They understood concepts of deep time and cosmic cycles that weren't supposed to be discovered until the development of modern astronomy. Their mathematical system was based on the number 60, which is ideal for astronomical calculations and geometric constructions. This system is still used today for measuring time and angles. The sophistication of their mathematical knowledge suggests instruction by beings with advanced understanding rather than independent discovery by an agricultural society. The Sumerian texts also describe technologies that sound remarkably similar to modern innovations. They describe flying vehicles advanced weapons, and communication devices that read like science fiction when translated into modern terms. These aren't vague descriptions of magical powers. They're detailed accounts of specific technologies and their applications. But perhaps most compelling is the consistency of these accounts across different cultures and time periods. The Anunnaki aren't unique to Sumerian civilization. Similar beings appear in the mythologies and traditions of cultures worldwide, described in remarkably similar terms despite having no contact with each other. The Hindu Vedas described the Devas and Asuras, beings from the sky who possessed advanced technology and influenced human development. The descriptions of their vehicles, their weapons, and their capabilities match the Sumerian accounts of Anunnaki technology. The Greek traditions speak of the Titans and Olympians, divine beings who ruled during a golden age before gradually withdrawing from human affairs. Egyptian texts describe the Neteru, godlike beings who established civilization and ruled during the earliest periods of Egyptian history. Native American traditions speak of star people who came from the sky and taught humanity essential skills. Australian Aboriginal traditions describe the Dreamtime beings who shaped the land and created the first humans. These aren't isolated stories. They're part of a global pattern of accounts describing contact between humans and advanced beings. The consistency of these accounts across cultures that had no contact with each other suggests a common origin, actual historical events rather than independent mythology. The question becomes, how do we explain this global pattern of similar accounts? The conventional explanation is that humans have a natural tendency to create stories about gods and supernatural beings. But this explanation doesn't account for the specific details, the technological descriptions, and the consistency across isolated cultures. A more satisfactory explanation is that these accounts preserve memories of actual contact with advanced beings. The Anunnaki weren't unique to Mesopotamia. They were part of a global civilization that influenced human development worldwide. The similar accounts across cultures reflect this shared history rather than independent mythological creation. This interpretation is supported by the archaeological evidence. We find similar megalithic structures, advanced technologies, and sophisticated knowledge appearing in different cultures at different times. The pattern suggests coordinated development rather than independent discovery. The implications of this evidence are profound. If the Anunnaki accounts are accurate, then human civilization isn't the result of gradual evolution and independent development. It's the product of guided development by an advanced species with their own agenda. Our technologies, our social structures, our religions, and even our genetic makeup might all be the result of Anunnaki intervention. But this raises uncomfortable questions about human autonomy and independence. If we were created by the Anunnaki, if our development was guided by their agenda, then what does that mean for human free will and self-determination? Are we truly independent beings, or are we still following programming established by our creators? The Sumerian texts suggest that the Anunnaki established systems of control that would maintain their influence even after their visible departure. They created religious hierarchies, political structures, and social systems that would preserve their agenda across generations. They selected human bloodlines that carried their genetic heritage and positioned these lineages as rulers and leaders. This would explain many of the persistent patterns in human history. The concentration of power in the hands of small elites, the prevalence of hierarchical social structures, the consistent themes of divine kingship and religious authority. These might not be natural human tendencies, but rather the result of Anunnaki programming. The evidence also suggests that the Anunnaki didn't disappear entirely. The texts describe their gradual withdrawal from direct involvement, but not their complete departure. they established institutions and systems that could maintain their influence without requiring their constant presence. Some researchers suggest that the Anunnaki continue to influence human development through hidden channels. Secret societies, religious institutions, and political organizations might serve as vehicles for continued Anunnaki guidance. The persistence of certain symbols, rituals, and beliefs across cultures and time periods suggests ongoing coordination rather than independent development. Others propose that the Anunnaki departed entirely, leaving humanity to develop independently according to the programming they established. In this view, human history represents the working out of Anunnaki plans and objectives, but without their direct involvement. Still others suggest that the Anunnaki remain present but in forms that we don't recognize or understand. They might exist in different dimensions, operate through advanced technology, or maintain influence through means that are beyond our current comprehension. What's clear is that the Anunnaki question has implications that extend far beyond ancient history. If these beings were real, if they influenced human development as described in the texts, then understanding their agenda becomes crucial for understanding our own future. The evidence continues to accumulate as new discoveries are made and new technologies allow us to examine ancient sites and artifacts in greater detail. Satellite imagery reveals massive structures that were previously unknown. Advanced dating techniques push back the timelines of human achievement. Genetic analysis reveals anomalies in human development that don't fit conventional evolutionary models. Each new discovery adds to the picture of human history that diverges from the conventional narrative. The pattern of evidence increasingly supports the possibility that human development was influenced by advanced beings who possessed capabilities far beyond what we attribute to ancient peoples. But examining this evidence requires us to overcome significant psychological and cultural barriers. The idea that human civilization might be the product of external intervention challenges fundamental assumptions about human independence and achievement. It suggests that we might not be the masters of our own destiny that we like to believe. The academic establishment has been reluctant to seriously consider these possibilities, partly due to the association with fringe theories and partly due to the implications for established historical narratives. But the evidence is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore or explain away through conventional means. As we continue to explore these questions, we must remain open to possibilities that challenge our conventional understanding while maintaining rigorous standards of evidence and analysis. The Anunnaki question isn't just about ancient history, it's about understanding the true nature of human civilization and our place in the universe. The story of the Anunnaki forces us to confront fundamental questions about human origins, development, and destiny. Whether we accept these accounts as literal truth or as valuable symbolic narratives, they offer insights that are worth serious consideration. The evidence suggests that there's much more to human history than the conventional narrative acknowledges. As we piece together the evidence from archaeology, genetics, linguistics, and ancient texts, a picture emerges of human development that is far more complex and mysterious than we've been taught. The Anunnaki accounts provide a framework for understanding this complexity, offering explanations for anomalies and mysteries that conventional theories struggle to address. The question isn't whether we can prove the Anunnaki accounts beyond all doubt. The question is whether these accounts provide a better explanation for the evidence than the conventional narrative. And increasingly, the answer appears to be yes. But let's examine what happened when the Anunnaki allegedly began to withdraw from direct human contact. The Sumerian texts don't describe an abrupt departure. Instead, they detail a gradual process spanning thousands of years, where these beings slowly reduced their visible presence while maintaining control through established institutions and selected human intermediaries. This withdrawal wasn't random or accidental. According to the tablets, it was a deliberate strategy designed to maintain Anunnaki influence while reducing their direct involvement in day-to-day human affairs. As human populations grew and became more sophisticated, direct rule became increasingly difficult to maintain. The solution was to establish systems that could operate independently while still serving Anunnaki interests. The texts describe how the Anunnaki established what we might recognize today as the first governmental bureaucracies. They created administrative systems with human officials who were trained to carry out Anunnaki policies. These officials were given authority to make decisions within established parameters, but ultimate control remained with their Anunnaki supervisors. More significantly, the tablets describe the establishment of priestly classes who served as intermediaries between the Anunnaki and the general population. These priests weren't just religious figures, they were administrators, judges, and keepers of knowledge who maintained Anunnaki authority through religious and social control. The genius of this system was that it created the appearance of human self-governance while maintaining actual Anunnaki control. Humans could believe they were ruling themselves while actually following predetermined patterns established by their creators. The system was self-perpetuating because each generation of human leaders was trained by the previous generation to maintain the same structures and priorities. This would explain why we find such similar governmental and religious systems appearing independently in cultures around the world. The divine kingship of Egypt, the priest kings of Mesopotamia, the god emperors of China, and the sacred rulers of the Americas all followed remarkably similar patterns despite having no apparent contact with each other. But the Anunnaki influence extended beyond just political control. The texts describe how they established educational systems designed to preserve and transmit specific types of knowledge while suppressing others. They created what we might call the first mystery schools, institutions where selected humans were taught advanced knowledge under strict conditions of secrecy. These mystery schools served multiple purposes. They preserved Anunnaki knowledge across generations, ensuring that essential technologies and understanding wouldn't be lost. They provided a mechanism for the controlled release of new knowledge when conditions were appropriate, and they created a class of initiated humans who could serve as intermediaries between the Anunnaki and the general population. The influence of these mystery schools can be traced throughout human history, from the Egyptian priesthood to the Greek mystery religions, from medieval alchemists to modern secret societies. We find consistent patterns of esoteric knowledge being preserved and transmitted through initiatory systems. What's particularly intriguing is that these systems often preserve knowledge that seems anachronistic for their time periods. Medieval alchemists possessed detailed knowledge of chemistry and metallurgy that wasn't supposed to be discovered until centuries later. Ancient astronomers had precise knowledge of planetary movements that required sophisticated mathematical calculations. Renaissance architects incorporated engineering principles that weren't formally developed until the modern era. The conventional explanation is that this knowledge was developed independently by brilliant individuals who were ahead of their time. But when you examine the specific details, patterns emerge that suggest coordinated preservation and transmission rather than independent discovery. The Anunnaki accounts provide a framework for understanding these patterns. If advanced knowledge was established during the period of direct Anunnaki involvement and then preserved through mystery schools and secret societies, then the appearance of anachronistic knowledge becomes understandable. It wasn't new discovery. It was the controlled release of ancient knowledge when conditions were appropriate. This interpretation is supported by the fact that many of these knowledge systems explicitly claim ancient origins. Alchemical texts frequently reference ancient Egyptian or Mesopotamian sources. Masonic traditions claim descent from the builders of Solomon's temple. Hermetic teachings trace their origins to ancient Egyptian wisdom. These claims are usually dismissed as mythological legitimization, attempts to give authority to relatively recent innovations. But what if these claims are actually accurate? What if these systems do preserve ancient knowledge that was established during the period of direct Anunnaki involvement. The evidence suggests that this might be the case when you trace the specific techniques, symbols, and concepts used in these systems. You find consistent patterns that extend back to the earliest human civilizations. The knowledge isn't just claimed to be ancient, it actually demonstrates characteristics that suggest ancient origins. But the Anunnaki influence wasn't limited to esoteric knowledge systems. The texts describe how they established economic and social structures that would maintain their control over human development. They created systems of resource extraction, labor organization, and wealth distribution that served their interests while appearing to serve human needs. The most obvious example is the establishment of mining operations. According to the Sumerian accounts, the original purpose of human creation was to provide labor for gold extraction. The Anunnaki established extensive mining networks that operated for thousands of years, extracting precious metals that were apparently essential for their technology and survival. But the economic systems they established extended far beyond mining. They created agricultural systems that could support large populations while generating surpluses that could be appropriated for Anunnaki use. They established trade networks that could move resources across vast distances. They created monetary systems that could facilitate complex economic transactions. These economic structures became self-perpetuating. Each generation of humans was trained to maintain and expand the systems established by their predecessors. The economic activity appeared to serve human needs, but it actually continued to serve the original Anunnaki objectives of resource extraction and population control. This would explain why we find similar economic patterns appearing in different cultures throughout history. The emphasis on precious metals, the development of complex trade networks, the establishment of hierarchical labor systems. These aren't natural human tendencies, but rather the continuation of patterns established during the period of direct Anunnaki involvement. The archaeological evidence supports this interpretation. We find evidence of sophisticated mining operations, complex trade networks, and advanced metallurgy appearing suddenly in the archaeological record without clear developmental precursors. The techniques and scale of these operations suggest capabilities that exceed what we attribute to ancient peoples. But perhaps most significantly, we find evidence that these systems were designed to benefit small elites rather than general populations. The wealth generated by ancient economic activity was concentrated in the hands of rulers and priests who claimed divine authority. The general population provided labor, but received minimal benefits from their efforts. This pattern of elite control and popular exploitation has persisted throughout human history. From ancient god kings to modern corporate oligarchs, we find consistent patterns of small groups controlling vast resources, while larger populations struggle for basic needs. The conventional explanation is that this reflects natural human tendencies toward hierarchy and competition. But the Anunnaki accounts suggest a different interpretation. These patterns might not be natural human tendencies, but rather the continuation of control systems established by the Anunnaki to maintain their influence over human development. The persistence of these patterns across cultures and time periods suggests systematic design rather than independent development. The social structures described in the Sumerian texts also demonstrate sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. The Anunnaki didn't just establish systems of direct control, they created belief systems that would make humans willing participants in their own subjugation. The most obvious example is the establishment of religious systems that portrayed the Anunnaki as divine beings, deserving of worship and obedience. These weren't just primitive superstitions. They were sophisticated psychological control mechanisms that created emotional attachments to the control system itself. But the psychological manipulation extended beyond religious belief. The texts describe how the Anunnaki established social hierarchies that created competition and conflict among human populations. By dividing humans into competing groups, they ensured that human energy would be directed toward internal conflicts rather than challenges to Anunnaki authority. This divide and conquer strategy appears repeatedly throughout human history. From ancient tribal conflicts to modern national rivalries, we find consistent patterns of human populations being manipulated into conflicts that serve elite interests rather than popular needs. The conventional explanation is that humans are naturally tribal and competitive, but the Anunnaki accounts suggest that these conflicts might be artificially generated rather than naturally occurring. The texts describe how the Anunnaki deliberately created divisions among human populations to maintain their control. They established competing kingdoms, promoted religious conflicts, and encouraged cultural divisions that would prevent unified human action. The evidence for this interpretation can be found in the artificial nature of many historical conflicts. When you examine the underlying causes of wars, religious conflicts, and cultural divisions, you often find that they serve elite interests rather than popular needs. The conflicts appear to be orchestrated rather than organic. The Anunnaki accounts also describe how they established systems of information control that would limit human access to knowledge that might threaten their authority. They created educational systems that would teach humans essential skills while suppressing knowledge that might lead to independence or rebellion. This information control wasn't just about suppressing specific facts. It was about shaping human consciousness to accept limitations and dependencies that served Anunnaki interests. Humans were taught to see themselves as inferior beings who needed guidance from superior authorities. They were conditioned to accept social hierarchies and economic exploitation as natural and inevitable. The persistence of these psychological patterns throughout human history suggests that they might be more than just cultural traditions. They might represent programmed responses that were established during the period of direct Anunnaki involvement and then reinforced through generations of social conditioning. The evidence for this interpretation can be found in the consistency of these patterns across different cultures and time periods. From ancient civilizations to modern societies, we find remarkably similar patterns of psychological dependency, social hierarchy, and acceptance of authority. The universality of these patterns suggests systematic design rather than independent development. But the Anunnaki accounts also describe resistance to their control systems. The texts mention humans who questioned Anunnaki authority, who sought to develop independent knowledge, and who attempted to break free from the established control systems. These individuals were typically suppressed or eliminated, but their existence suggests that human independence was always a possibility. The stories of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, of Lucifer rebelling against divine authority, and of various cultural heroes challenging established powers might represent memories of actual historical events rather than mythological allegories. These stories consistently portray the acquisition of knowledge and the challenge to authority as both dangerous and necessary for human development. The pattern continues throughout recorded history. We find individuals and groups who challenge established authorities, who seek to develop independent knowledge, and who attempt to create alternative social systems. These efforts are typically suppressed by existing power structures, but they demonstrate the persistent human drive toward independence and self-determination. The question becomes, are these drives natural human characteristics, or are they the result of incomplete Anunnaki programming? The text suggests that humans retained certain capacities for independent thought and action, despite Anunnaki attempts to control them. These capacities might represent the influence of the pre-existing hominid species that was used in human creation. If this interpretation is correct, then human history can be understood as an ongoing struggle between programmed dependency and natural independence. The Anunnaki established systems designed to maintain control, but humans retained capacities that allowed them to resist and eventually overcome these systems. The evidence for this interpretation can be found in the gradual expansion of human knowledge and capability throughout history. Despite periodic suppressions and setbacks, humans have consistently developed new technologies, expanded their understanding of the natural world, and created more sophisticated social systems. This progress wasn't smooth or consistent. It was marked by periods of advancement followed by periods of regression, suggesting ongoing conflict between progressive and regressive forces. The conventional explanation is that this reflects the natural ups and downs of human development, but the Anunnaki accounts suggest that these conflicts might represent systematic resistance to human advancement by forces that benefit from maintaining control systems. The suppression of knowledge, the persecution of innovators, and the destruction of advanced civilizations might not be accidental, but rather the result of deliberate intervention by groups that maintain Anunnaki interests. The evidence for this interpretation can be found in the consistent patterns of knowledge suppression throughout history, from the burning of the Library of Alexandria to the persecution of scientists during the medieval period. We find repeated attempts to limit human access to knowledge that might threaten established authorities. These suppressions often coincide with periods of social change that might have led to greater human independence. The timing suggests coordination rather than coincidence, implying that forces existed that actively worked to maintain control systems established during the period of direct Anunnaki involvement. But the accounts also suggest that the Anunnaki control systems contained inherent weaknesses that would eventually lead to their breakdown. The texts describe how the withdrawal of direct Anunnaki involvement made these systems increasingly difficult to maintain. Without ongoing supervision, human administrators began to pursue their own interests rather than Anunnaki objectives. The gradual deterioration of these control systems might explain the increasing pace of human development in recent centuries. As Anunnaki influence weakened, humans gained greater freedom to pursue independent development. The result was the rapid expansion of knowledge and capability that characterizes the modern era. This interpretation suggests that we might be living through a period of transition from Anunnaki control to human independence. The accelerating pace of technological development, the breakdown of traditional authorities, and the increasing questioning of established institutions might all represent aspects of this transition. The question becomes, what happens next? If the Anunnaki accounts are accurate, if we are indeed transitioning from control to independence, then the future of human development depends on our ability to understand and overcome the control systems that have shaped our history. The evidence suggests that this transition is already underway. The democratization of information through digital technology, the rapid pace of scientific discovery, and the increasing global awareness of social and economic manipulation all represent challenges to traditional control systems. But the transition isn't guaranteed to succeed. The texts suggest that the Anunnaki established backup systems and contingency plans that could be activated if their primary control mechanisms failed. The possibility exists that more direct intervention might occur if human independence progresses beyond acceptable limits. The evidence for this possibility can be found in the increasing reports of unidentified aerial phenomena and the growing acknowledgement by government agencies that advanced technologies exist that exceed current human capabilities. These developments might represent the beginning of more direct intervention in human affairs. The question of whether such intervention would be beneficial or harmful depends on understanding the true nature of Anunnaki objectives. The texts suggest that their primary concern was resource extraction and population control rather than human welfare. If these objectives remain unchanged, then renewed intervention might not serve human interests. But the accounts also suggest that not all Anunnaki shared the same objectives. Some were portrayed as more sympathetic to human welfare and independence. the possibility exists that different factions might have different approaches to human development. The complexity of these questions requires careful analysis of available evidence rather than simple acceptance or rejection of the Anunnaki accounts. The implications are too significant to dismiss without thorough investigation, but they're also too important to accept without rigorous scrutiny. As we continue to uncover new evidence and develop new analytical tools, our understanding of these questions will undoubtedly evolve. The challenge is to remain open to possibilities that challenge conventional understanding while maintaining standards of evidence and analysis that can distinguish between valid insights and unsupported speculation. The Anunnaki question ultimately forces us to confront fundamental questions about human nature, human potential, and human destiny. Whether we accept these accounts as literal truth or as valuable symbolic narratives, they offer perspectives on human development that are worth serious consideration. The development of human technological capabilities might eventually reach levels that attract renewed Anunnaki attention. The texts suggest that they maintained interest in human development and might intervene if our progress threatens their interests or if we achieve capabilities that warrant their attention. The question becomes, how should humanity prepare for the possibility of renewed contact with advanced beings or technologies? The Anunnaki accounts suggest that such encounters have occurred before and might occur again. Understanding the historical patterns might help us develop appropriate responses to future possibilities. The Anunnaki question ultimately challenges us to think more deeply about human nature, human potential, and human responsibility. The answers to these questions will determine not just our understanding of the past, but our approach to the extraordinary future that awaits us. The story continues to unfold as new evidence emerges and new possibilities develop. The question isn't whether the Anunnaki accounts are completely accurate in every detail, but whether they provide valuable insights into human origins and potential that can guide our future development. Consider the remarkable timing of our investigation. We live in an era where genetic engineering is becoming routine, where artificial intelligence approaches human-level capability, where space exploration is expanding beyond government control, and where global communication networks allow instant information sharing across all populations. These developments mirror the capabilities attributed to the Anunnaki in ancient texts, suggesting that we might be rediscovering technologies and knowledge that were once commonplace. The psychological transformation required to accept these possibilities represents perhaps the greatest challenge we face. We've been conditioned to see ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution, the masters of our own destiny, the sole intelligence in a vast empty cosmos. The possibility that we were created, guided, and perhaps continue to be monitored by beings with capabilities far exceeding our own challenges, the very foundation of human pride and independence. The ancient mystery of the Anunnaki continues to unfold, offering insights that bridge the gap between our mysterious past and our extraordinary future. The question isn't whether we can solve this mystery completely, but whether we can learn from its insights while developing our own path forward into whatever remarkable possibilities await us. And so we find ourselves at the crossroads of an enigma. After delving into cryptic stone inscriptions, baffling relics unearthed from forgotten ruins, and Mesopotamian legends that continue to perplex scholars to this day, we've examined the remarkable celestial wisdom, sophisticated calculations, and enigmatic tales of entities that allegedly came from the stars above. It's undeniable that these ancient people possess knowledge that seems impossibly advanced for a society that flourished millennia before optical instruments or digital calculations existed. But the question that haunts us remains: what was the true nature of the Anunnaki? Were they actual divine beings who shaped the course of human events, merely allegorical figures woven into mythology, or perhaps fragmented recollections of encounters far stranger than we dare imagine. The choice of interpretation rests with you. The fragments of evidence lie before us, meticulously examined, yet even today's experts remain divided on what it all means. What strikes me most profoundly is this: our ancient past refuses to reveal all its secrets. It remains an evolving riddle, beckoning fresh perspectives and perpetual exploration. If mysteries of this magnitude truly lie hidden in our distant origins, then what other profound truths have we overlooked? What additional enigmas rest concealed beneath layers of time and earth, poised to transform our entire understanding of existence itself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you're drawn to these unsolved mysteries, hit the like and subscribe button to join us as we venture further into the shadows of ancient mysteries and lost civilizations, because with each revelation comes an inescapable realization. The story of humanity may be infinitely more remarkable and bewildering than we've ever dared to believe. Sweet dreams, fellow guardians of human wisdom.